Hi, this is Mrs. Chavez. We're in the last section of Chapter 2, and in this section we're going to look at the river dynasties in China. Now, the walls of China's first cities were built about 4,000 years ago. That was at least 1,000 years before the walls of Ur and the Great Pyramids of Egypt and those planned cities of the Indus Valley were built. Unlike the other three river civilizations, the civilization that began along one of China's river systems continues to thrive. The geography of China plays a huge role in their development. Natural barriers somewhat isolated ancient China from all other civilizations. To China's east lay the Yellow Sea. If you take a look over here at your map, I'm going to mark these things off for you. Here's the Yellow Sea, and the China Sea. That's over here. You can't see it very much because there's a picture in the way, but that's where it's at. And then, of course, the Pacific Ocean, right here. Mountain ranges and deserts are in the western half. Here's all the mountain ranges and the deserts up here. All right. And that's about 2/3 of China's landmass. So in West China, we have the Taklamakan Desert. I already circled that one. And the icy 15-foot plateau of Tibet. That's down here, right by the Himalaya Mountains. And to the southwest, of course, are the Himalayas. And to the north, we have that desolate, what we call the Gobi Desert up here. So you can see from China's topography here that they've got several deserts, they have the plateau of Tibet, they've got major rivers, but their rivers all run east and west. They don't run north and south. Not like in the United States, we have this wonderful North American continent that has rivers that run both east and west, but we have major rivers that run north and south that feed those tributaries that run east and west. China does not have this. Their rivers run east and west only, okay? So let's talk about the major river system here, because this becomes really important for China. They have two major river systems. They have a lot of other rivers that run east and west, but two major ones. And that would be the Huanghe, that's in the north, and it's known as the Yellow River, and I'll explain that when we get to it. And then in central China, we have the Changjiang, that's also known as the Yangtze River, and it flows east to the Yellow Sea. Now, both of these rivers flow from the Himalayas, from the mountains. So the Huanghe, whose name means Yellow River, of course, the reason why they call it that is because it deposits this huge amount of yellowish silt when it overflows its banks. So the silt is actually fertile soil, and it's called loess, L-O-E-S-S, which is blown by the winds from the deserts to the west and the north. Now, like other ancient civilizations in this chapter that we read about, China's first civilization developed in a river valley. China, too, faced the dangers of floods, but its geographic isolation also posed other challenges. The Huanghe's floods could be disastrous. Sometimes floods devoured whole villages, earning the river the nickname China's River of Sorrow. Because of China's relative geographic isolation, though, early settlers had to supply their own goods rather than trading with outside peoples. It's a huge landmass, okay? China's natural boundaries didn't completely protect them, though, from outsiders. Invasions from the west and the north occurred again and again in Chinese history. So what we're going to see here in China is the same thing we see in Russia and in Canada and in other northern hemisphere countries, where they have huge land masses, but only 10% of the land in China is available for farming, or we call that arable land. So much of the land lies within the small plain between the Huanghe and the Changjiang in eastern China, and they call this the North China Plain, and that's where most of the crops are grown. It's the heartland of China. So throughout China's long history, its political boundaries have expanded and also contracted depending on the strength or the weakness of the ruling families. Yet the heartland of China remained the center of its civilization. You know, we don't know a whole lot about the origins of the Chinese people, but we do know some things. China hasn't always been so forthcoming in sharing their archaeological finds with us, but this was a phenomenon, so the world found out about it. Fossil remains show that ancestors of modern humans actually lived in southwest China about 1.7 million years ago. Now in northern China near Beijing, where the the North China Plain is, there was a full skeleton of a Homo erectus found there. And this man became known as Peking Man. And his remains show that people settled this river valley as much as 500,000 years ago. We know much more about the dynasties of China. So even before the Sumerians settled in the southern Mesopotamia, and early Chinese cultures were building farming settlements along the Huanghe, that's the Yellow River. Around 2000 BCE, some of these settlements grew into China's first cities. And according to legend, the first Chinese dynasty was the Jia dynasty, and it emerged about at this time. Its leader was an engineer and a mathematician named Yu, and his flood control plan and irrigation projects helped tame the Huanghe and its tributaries so that settlements could actually grow. They could start growing more crops. The legend of Yu reflects the level of technology of a society making the transition to a civilization. About the time the civilization of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley fell to the outside invaders, a people called the Shang rose to power in northern China. The Qing dynasty lasted from around 1700 BCE to 1027 BCE. So if you take a look, here's the Jia dynasty in green, and here's the Shang dynasty in green also. Look at the different size, though, is what I want you to see. It's starting to grow and expand. It was the very first family of rulers to leave written records. So the Shang kings built elaborate palaces and tombs that have also been uncovered by archaeologists too. The artifacts that archaeologists have uncovered reveal a lot about Qing society. Among the oldest and the most important Qing cities was Anyang, one of the capitals of the Qing dynasty. Unlike the cities of the Indus Valley or the Fertile Crescent, though, Anyang was built mainly of wood. The city stood in a forest clearing, forest all around it. So the higher classes lived in these timber-framed houses with walls of clay and straw, and these houses were within the city walls. The peasants and the craft people lived in huts outside the city. So if you think about this, within the city walls is the major city of Shang, but also all of the shops and merchants and things like that. Now, the people who supplied the food and the craftspeople lived outside the city walls. So at night, the city walls the doors are closed to the city, and the people outside have to fend for themselves, whereas the people on the inside are protected by military. So the Shang surrounded their cities with these huge, massive earthen walls that they used for protection. The archaeological remains of one city include a wall of packed earth that was 118 feet wide at its base, and it circled an area of 1.2 square miles. So it likely took 10,000 or more men 12 years to build this type of structure. And like the pyramids of Egypt and the cities of the Indus Valley, these walls demonstrate something that's important. That the Shang rulers had the ability to raise and control large forces of workers to do public works. Shang people needed walled cities because they were constantly waging war. They were very warlike. The chariot is one of the major tools of war, and that was first introduced by contact with cultures from Western Asia. Professional warriors underwent these lengthy trainings to learn the techniques of driving and shooting from horse-drawn chariots, very similar to when we get to areas around the Greeks where we start to see many more warlike peoples. Now, in the Chinese view, people who lived outside of Chinese civilization were barbarians, because the Chinese saw their country as the center of the civilized world. Their own name for China was the Middle Kingdom. The culture that grew up in China had strong, unifying bonds, and from the earliest times, the group seemed to have been more important than the individual. A person's chief loyalty throughout life was to the family, and beyond this, people owed their obedience and respect to the ruler of the Middle Kingdom, just as they did to the elders in their family. Now, the family was central to Chinese society. The most important virtue, of course, was respect for one's parents. The elder men in the family controlled the family property and made important decisions. Women, on the other hand, were treated as inferiors throughout. They were expected to obey their fathers, their husbands, and later their own sons. When a girl was between the ages of 13 and 16 years old, her marriage was arranged, and she moved into the house of her husband. Only by bearing sons for the husband's family could she hope to improve her status.